Traced many peoples in Western Europe to the lost 10 tribes of Israel. The 10 tribes of Israel were part of the Israelite peoples. They separated from Judah. They set up their own kingdom. After that, they were conquered by the Assyrians, who took them into exile. In their places of exile, some of them were transported overseas by Assyrians or by Assyrian proxies, such as Philistines and Phoenicians, almost straight away to the west, where they worked in mines and so on, whereas others remained. In the course of time, due to upheavals and political combinations and circumstances, they managed to break free. And at least a portion of them broke free and crossed the Bosporus. The Bosporus is the area of water that divides Europe from Asia. In Turkey, you have a side of Turkey that is in Asia, another part of Turkey which is in Europe. There's a body of water that divides them. The northern portion of that body of water is known as the Bosporus. And according to these traditions, they crossed the Bosporus and then they continued. And we have traditions both from Wales, that is ancient British traditions, so the Celts, and also from Scandinavia, saying the same thing, that their ancestors were from the tribe of Dan, or from Don, or from Dona, which are all different ways in Hebrew of pronouncing the word Dan, and that they crossed the Bosporus, and they continued westward. And Jerome, the translator of the Bible, Jerome in the 400 CE, he translated the Bible, probably using both Greek and Hebrew manuscripts, and he mentions a tradition that both Jews from Judah and Israelites from the lost 10 tribes crossed the Bosporus and continued westward, and that in the end times they will return by the same source. So this tradition is the same as we find in Danish traditions and also in Welsh traditions, saying the same thing, or almost the same thing. So here we have different sources corroborating each other, confirming each other, and we found that of interest and importance, and it achieves additional import when we look at all the surrounding evidence, additional evidence. In Scandinavian mythology, one version reported by Saxo Grammaticus, 1150 to 1220 CE, writing of the origins of the ancestral gods of the Scandinavian peoples, he said that they too come from the area of Byzantium, and that one of their ancestors that ruled over a city in the nearby, known as Dona. Dona is another way of pronouncing Dan, one of the tribes of Israel. So both the Welsh version and the Scandinavian version link up to Don or Dan. Don in Hebrew is another way of pronouncing the word Dan. Dan was one of the tribes of Israel. So here we have a link between the people of Dan in the same area near Byzantium, are passing over through the Straits of through the Bosporus Straits into Europe, and then moving westward. Zechariah also speaks of the exiles. He says in Zechariah 10:6, I will strengthen the house of Judah and I will save the house of Joseph. Judah is the people of Judah, the Jewish people. House of Joseph are Ephraim and Manasseh, with the heads of the 10 tribes, the lost 10 tribes, and I will bring them again to place them, and I will have mercy upon them, and those shall be as though I had not cast them, for I am the Lord their God, and I will hear them. And he goes on, and they of Ephraim shall be like a mighty man, and your heart shall rejoice as through wine. Here their children shall see it and be glad, their heart shall rejoice in the Lord. I will hiss for them and gather them, for I have redeemed them, they shall increase as they have increased. And I will sow them among the people, and they shall redeem me in far countries, and they shall live with their children and turn again. They shall return, they shall repent. I'll bring them again also to the land of Egypt, and gather them out of Assyria, and will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon. A place shall not be found for them. So they shall be brought back from their places of exile. They shall be brought in the land of Gilead and Lebanon. Gilead and Lebanon mean the regions now controlled by Jordan and by Syria. Gilead and Lebanon, and by Lebanon. These areas in the future shall be settled by Israelites, returning Israelites from Judah and from Joseph, according to Zechariah. Says they shall gather them from Egypt. Egypt could be Egypt that we know of today, and in some cases Egypt is also applied to Russia, so it could have several meanings. Assyria also could apply to the region known as Assyria, as Iraq, in Iraq of today, but it also could apply to areas of Europe. One stage the Assyrians ruled over Austria and Central Europe and southern Germany. From there they moved onwards, and this was associated with the exile of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Gilead, as we said, means eastern Israel, the Jordan, Syria and Lebanon. Lebanon means Lebanon. These areas will be repopulated by the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And he too speaks of a passing through the sea. 10:11, and shall pass through the sea with affliction. And he shall pass through the sea with affliction, and shall smite the waves in the sea. And all the dips of the river shall dry up, and the pride of Assyria shall be brought low. And the scepter of Egypt shall depart away. Remember you not the former things, neither consider the things of old. And he continues. He speaks of the end times. He speaks of the rebuilding of the temple. See Isaiah 43:24. And he thinks of the forgiving of sins and of redemption and renewal and reconciliation between the God of Israel and his people. So here we have both Welsh and Scandinavian tradition tracing their ancestry to groups who arrived by the Bosporus. The Welsh sources speak of the sons of Dona. That is an alternative way of pronouncing the Hebrew name Dan. Scandinavian tradition speaks of a place named Dona, which is also another way of pronouncing the name Dan. And both of them speak of the same migratory pathway that they used to reach the west from the area of Israel after they had been exiled by the Assyrians. Tribe of Dan was especially important in the peopling of Denmark. Denmark is named Denmark. It's named after Dan. And the Danes from Dan also invaded England and Ireland and settled there. They are important in the British population. Also in ancient Ireland, before the Danes from Denmark came, before the Vikings came, there was another people known as the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of Dona. It was also important in early Irish history. So that is what we have, and a point of interest is that the tribe of Dan was settled in several places in the Middle East before their exile. The two of their major areas was one by Tel Aviv, Jaffa, that region, still known as the area of Dan in Hebrew. And also in the Galilee there was a settlement of Dan. The commentators noticed differences between the two settlements of Dan. Dan in the south had a weakness for sexual adventure for looking over the fence, as if to say. Whereas in the north, the weakness of Dan was more intellectual and inclined towards idolatry. He traced down to Denmark and also to Ireland and Wales and to the Danelaw area of northern England, which was conquered by Vikings from Denmark and settled by them in the north of England. In Ireland, we find Dan from Dona, the tribe of Dona, to be prominent in the area around Ulster, Cavan, Donegal. Also the Viking city settlements. All of the major townships of Ireland were established by the Vikings. The Vikings in Ireland came from both Norway and Denmark, but those of Denmark were prominent in this case. There are other Israelite tribes and other peoples in Ireland in addition to these. We're now concentrating upon the tribe of Dan. Dan is represented by a snake. Snake is known in folklore as being devious, crafty. Also, Dan is represented by a lion pouncing on his victim, or like a lion and a serpent, a snake together. Dan may also be symbolized by an eagle. Dan in tradition was more pulled to idolatry than the other tribes. He was more involved with non-Israelites and he absorbed their values. Dan was the rear guard, the section of Israel that came at the end when they were moving through the wilderness. He protected the rear. He was conservative and aggressive. He also has a tendency to waste himself, to abuse his relationships with others, and to squander his wealth, if he has any. And he hopes all the while to make it up sometime in the future. Dan is also a warrior. Samson came from Dan. The hero Samson came from Dan. And so, according to tradition, with the mother of the future Messiah, son of David, will be from the tribe of Judah. But his mother will be from the tribe of Dan. Also, the future Messiah, in some sources, we will have a kind of sidekick and assistant from the tribe of Dan. A Jewish legend says that Dan, a Jewish legend from 800s, an early Jewish legend, says that Dan left the land of Israel before the other tribes. The other tribes left when the Assyrians took them. Dan left before then, according to this tradition. Since Dan did not want to participate with King Jeroboam, the king of the northern tribes, who was fighting against Judah, the tribe of Dan did not want to participate, to take part in hostilities against Jews, against Judah. Dan is a peacemaker amongst the tribes. Dan is a warrior, but he's also a peacemaker amongst the tribes. He avoids fraternal conflict. He's quite prepared to fight against foreigners, but he doesn't like fighting against his brothers, and he doesn't like his brothers fighting between themselves. He's not weak, he's not afraid, he's a doer of justice. He's a litigator. Many lawyers and judges and legally minded types amongst the lost Dan tribes often come from Dan. So too may some criminal types also be from Dan. So that is what we have. There's much more that we could say, but we've also said a lot, and this is of interest and of value. Thank you. May the Lord God of Israel bless you.